there.
Well, I'd always been a little ahead of the pack with computers. I had an early Apple II, first consumer grade home computer. Kind of wasn't sure what to do with it, because if you got it then, you basically had accounting programs and you had ping pong type game programs. And so I spent a lot of time with it, exploring it, learning how to program it, but it was really basic. And simultaneous to that, I was on a bus in Chicago for reasons I don't recall, but I saw a young child playing, sitting with what apparently would have been his grandmother by her age. And he was deeply involved with an early Atari game. And I thought, if that had been me in my childhood of that age, I'd be talking to my grandmother, because grandparents are quite cool. They're pretty dedicated to grandchildren. And I thought that was sad, that interaction wasn't human to human. It was a machine had taken over from the grandmother. Like he was holding an electronic grandmother, conversing with that. Of course, little did I know that would be a drop in the bucket compared to what's going on now with cell phones and lack of communication, not just cross generations, but within the generation. But I thought that could be interesting, where this new thing called the home computer could take over in a kind of a Frankenstein way. And then I also thought of Cyrano de Bergerac, which I'd always loved as a piece of literature. And that's where the idea of writing love songs came from. So the idea was pretty strong and pretty quick. It was what they call an epiphany. And then I went out and pitched it to various studios and got a deal at Universal, as I said. They got the first draft, which was called Computer Love. That was the original title. You do a lot of rewriting. So a script is never really finished until you've edited the last shot, chosen the last piece of music, finished the last effect, whatever it is. A script is really constantly being rewritten, or I think should be. Milos Forman, the great director, had a famous sentence, which is, the director rewrites the writer, but the editor rewrites the director. It's not always an editor, it's the editing process rewrites the film. So if you have the writer along for the whole ride, then can be pretty smooth sailing. I was along because I also produced the film. And the reason why Electric Dreams got into Steve Barron's hands was because the continuity clerk was Zelda Barron, Steve Barron's mother. So I got to know her very well on Yentl. Any picture, you get to know the crew very well because you're with them through such intense situations for so long. And I asked her to read it, and she really liked it. She said, "Oh, my son would love this," and he's about to become a director, a feature director. He's quite well known as a pop promo director. She said, "I'd love to show you his work," and I was very impressed. I mean, you could not be. Steve was a real vanguard in that area. So I could see where Electric Dreams would be a natural fit for him, because in essence it's a musical, and its musical numbers are what we then would call pop promos. So we were getting one of the best guys who did pop promos to also do the rest of the script. And then through Steve, I met Richard Branson, because they were close friends. Steve having done many videos for Virgin Records. So that was a pretty quick process. Branson, of course, one of his reasons for great fame and fortune is that he was ahead of the pack, saw things coming. And as I recall, his company Virgin, he had Virgin Films, Virgin Records. And so the ability to put records from his recording artists into the film and have this so-called synergy of, you know, records and videos and pop promos and hit singles. That was, I think, post Flashdance, there was an attitude that you needed a hit song from an 80s film to sort of go with the hand in hand with the marketing of the film. So this gave the potential for a number of hit singles. And then we had a fantastic distribution deal for MGM. Like I said, you asked, was everybody after the project? Yes and no. Once we had one person interested, then we had multiple offers. Each offer had different terms and conditions. And the MGM deal was the best, we thought, of all the offers. We took it. And basically we were a go picture overnight.
129 for San Francisco. Will passengers...
With these films, there's always two ways to go, and it's obvious. You either go with recognized names, and you pay for that, but you get something for that, because by using recognized names, there's marketing built into it. Audiences, I think, are skeptical of films that have no names in them. when they look at whatever they use nowadays to check their iPad or their phone to see what's playing that weekend. If they don't recognize a few names in the cast, I think they think, it's a B picture, can't be very good. I'll wait till later. So you pay for names. Otherwise, you go with total unknowns. Flashdance was an example. I don't recall anybody in Flashdance who anybody had ever heard of or cared. So when the music is strong, like it was in Flashdance, you tend to say we can break out names, we can establish new talent, and that was our original intention. We had actors contacting us because once a film is a go picture, word gets announced immediately, and you have agents all over you trying to get their clients an audition or a meeting. And that was very flattering, but we didn't even see those people because we decided, no, we're not going to be a 200 peso movie, we're going to be a 100 peso movie, and we're going to cast accordingly. And a film called Tender Mercies had just come out with Lynne Van Dolen, and he was not known, but he was quite known at that moment because of that film. Very popular film, and he was very strong in it. So we had a top casting director, a lady named Wally Nisita, and I was in London at the time. I can still remember the theater I saw it at because the film had a big impact on me. And I called her from outside the theater, and I said, what do you think of Lynne Van Dolen? She said, I think he's great. He'd be wonderful. I said, okay, well, let's see what Steve thinks. And we now need to find, if he agrees, I was really like anxious, just move this along, get this done. Since we had elected not to go with recognized names, that was an easy process. If you saw somebody who were excited about them, then you could move very quickly. Wally then called, I'm hesitating because I'm never sure, I don't want to embarrass anybody. Wally then called and said, top agent at the time called and was dying for his client to be met. And she was up for a couple of really big things. Because there's that aspect of casting as well. It was sort of three tiers. There's actors who are known, who you can say, oh, that's the lady from such and such. Actors who have nothing going on, nothing on their resume, and would be initiating a career with a lead in a film, distributed by a major studio. And then there are those actors in between who have been cast in something but it hasn't come out yet. So the jury's still out on them. Are they going to be a big star? Are they going to be a one-hit wonder? Are they going to have no successful films, but they will have been on film? And so this particular actress, who probably I shouldn't name because she didn't do it, but she had two important films about to come out in the interval. And I met with her in New York. I met her and Lynne at the same time in a restaurant in New York. And I thought they were sensational together. So I was like in heaven. It's like, my God, this girl could be famous before our film comes out, which in fact she did become famous. And Lynne seems ideal with her. There was that same quality of being uncomfortable and anxious around this girl of his dreams and not being able to really articulate his feelings. Maybe it was an act. Maybe he was putting on a great act, but it was working very well. So I called Steve from LA or from New York the next day, and I said, well, for what it's worth, I think Wally has found the perfect couple, and I can't wait for you to meet them. He says, great, great, great. So he met them in New York, and he did not have the same reaction. He really liked Lynne. He was sold on Lynne, but he didn't think she was the right girl and wanted to pursue that further. And, they say 80% of directing is casting, so you have to really listen to those directorial instincts and respect them. So, well, I said, fine, I have others in mind. And that's when we met Virginia, but she was equally delightful. Different entirely, but equally delightful. And of course, Virginia had a couple of films. Maybe she had done DUNE. And what made her more important in DUNE, besides having this small princess part, was that they had called her in to open the film. There's a huge opening prologue. Nobody understood DUNE. So instead of the Star Wars screaming titles over your head, going on and on, they had Virginia in a nice close-up going on and on, telling you about the Spice Wars. And now I think most people would more recognize, this is how careers go up and down. I think more people would recognize Virginia today. They may not go, that's Virginia Madsen, but they go, I know that actress, I've seen that actress, than this other one who didn't get the part. Don't take any of this as being remorseful. It's just what happens. In a film, there's usually many people that have to be pleased. in order to make something happen. There are many slots you have to fall through to get through the final passage and get the part. So in the case of Virginia, Wally liked her, I liked her, Steve liked her. To be honest, I don't recall that Richard Branson weighed in. He was a really decent guy to work with. He could have said, okay, I want to see tapes of everyone. He didn't. But to be fair to me, I'm the one that got the distribution deal with MGM. I was able to make that choice. And MGM's distribution deal 100% financed the film. So the film was not a financially risky proposition for Richard. And that has a bit to do with the machinery of how you pre-finance a film, then pre-sell your territories, knowing before a camera's even rolling whether you've recouped your budget, blah, 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 blah. And the film was properly pre-sold so that the budget was covered from day one.
I wanted to be a great ballerina, but my mother said I was too short, so she gave me cello lessons instead. So what about you?
What, architecture?
Lenny probably was more a method actor than Virginia, so he probably needed more talking to and discussion. They both did a very good job. I was personally very pleased. I think Steve was too. I never heard any complaints. I never heard him say, well, we cast wrong or anything like that. But I think his process was a trial and error one that he worked out with them, meaning Steve was learning how to direct actors. But he handled it really well. You wouldn't know if you came on the set just a few weeks into shooting. I don't think you'd say, oh, that director's never directed actors before. He picked it up very quickly. And again, it may have an influence from his mother, who was being, one reason Zelda, his mother, I keep mentioning her, but she became a director, which is rare. Rarely do script continuity people step into that position. But Zelda became famous for the kind of person a director could consult and say, how was my performance? What did you think? Well, particularly if that director was also acting in the film, like Warren Beatty. She was famous for giving Warren advice on his performances and then other people's performances.
I want to meet her.
I was working for John Peters, and Bud Cort was going to be a star in a film they had called Die Laughing, starring Robbie Benson. Bud was to play the comic villain. And Bud had a terrible car accident, which caused need for surgical repair to the top of his head. He claimed it was all fine with his hair, you couldn't see it, but he didn't want anyone to see him. And it was getting closer and closer to the start date of his photography, making everyone on the production anxious, because here they had Bud Cort, which was somebody of importance, someone you would see visually, it wasn't just a voice, and yet they were not sure if they should recast him or not. It was getting tight. I was new to the company, so he had never met me. And I said, well, why don't I pretend to be a flower delivery guy for some flowers, get well soon flowers, and I'll get a hat and a shirt, and then I'll just see. Hopefully he'll answer the door, because I'm just a flower delivery guy, and I can give a report. And that's in fact what we did. And it was fine. The hair covered it. And that's how we met, which I had to tell him, because he was going to meet me on the set. It's like, what's that flower delivery guy doing on the set? Because it preserved his job, I don't think he was angry. If he had lost the job, I don't think he'd ever want to see me again. But we became good friends. So I always wanted to work with him. You know, I'm digressing a bit. It's interesting reading stories how Douglas Rains got the part in 2001 to play Hal, the computer. It was like a one-day gig. They had used, typically what you do is you just have the script lady read those lines if you're going to add them later. And I knew that wasn't going to work. I knew there had to be an actor. And I had to fight for that, because everyone said, no, just get an actor later. A couple of days, you know, ADR. Well, nope, I'm going to put my foot down. I have these powers. I can use them. We're going to hire an actor, and he's going to be on that set every day, working as an actor. And I might have had some good references for that process, but I can't think of them right now. So it was okay, if you say so, and we can afford them. So I had Bud in mind, not just because then I would do my friend a favor, which I always liked doing, but I knew he was first class.
How do you know so many words?
Word processing.
I knew that he had a vocal instrument that made him famous, and that he could do anything with it. So everyone was very happy. I mean, that was like, we finally had a name, and it was like, okay, we're breaking our rule a bit to not have recognizable names in the cast, but it would be, and I think he came up with "and special appearance by Bud Cort" or something like that, which I kind of said, well, we're lying because there's no appearance by Bud Cort. But okay, if that's what he wants, he can have it. It was Bud's idea to never be seen by the talent, to only be known as a voice from the computer, which again created a few technical obstacles, which meant possible impact on the budget. You never want that. Meaning there'd have to be a booth off the set.
Play it, Sam.
What key?
Your favorite.
You want verses first or the choruses?
We were fortunate that 90% of our settings, interior settings, were that one apartment. So when he wasn't there, we could work around it. But most of the time he was shooting he'd be in that little booth. He'd go there, he wouldn't cross paths with the actors. And it was funny, it was like a prison cell after a while. He had his photos pinned up and his little toys or whatever occupied his mind when he wasn't working.
And those words, I can't play that for her. I want to squeeze you, lick you, pucker up, and kiss you. You make her sound like a lemon.
But most they rhyme.
A general rule of thumb, people may know this, you start with your exteriors in a film, get rid of them first, because then if you have weather problems, you can move indoors. But you don't want to use up your interiors. God forbid, huge mistake would be to shoot all your interiors, have your last few weeks be your exteriors, and have weeks of thunder showers. You are screwed. So no competent production manager will ever schedule a film that way. So all of our exteriors were done first. And many of the exteriors were in England, believe it or not. I enjoyed telling people, no, that was done in England, that was done in England. It's funny how much you have to worry about things like light switches and toilet flushers and outlets, how much our brain knows those things. But we had a top set decorator. That's the man or woman who basically puts the chairs in and the furnishings and all that. He, on every film, if it was an American film, he would make one trip to America just to go to a hardware store. It'd be like going to a Home Depot and buying all the switches and all the toilet pulls, and just one big shopping trip to buy them all. If you had complex set construction, you had great talent in England. I don't think any people felt that the cameramen and the sound, etc., were any better in England, but they did feel that set construction was superior in England. So those films like Batman, Superman, all very set dominant. And it was cheaper then. Labor was cheaper. I don't know that they had subsidies back then. I don't recall any. Subsidies are now the new thing. Back then it was just simply, where's the cheaper labor cost? And a film really is a camp of gypsies, moving fast and making snap decisions. Because that camp of gypsies, they each have a little meter running, like a taxi. So much per hour they cost you. And so you better get the shots that day that you need in the pages shot and get through the schedule on schedule or you're in trouble. So there's nothing like having the pros.
Attention sports fans.
Well, I'd love to say we were trying all kinds of experimental things, but it was really a safe shoot in the sense it was basically a couple of actors in a big old apartment, occasionally going out into the community and, having conversations that involved more than two people. Of course, you could call it a love triangle in a sense. The thing that was the most challenging had to do with the computer graphics, because of course we knew that this was not a robot. This thing did not have arms and a head and eyeballs that could move. So the face was going to be static except for what was projected on it. And again, today, anyone could do this stuff with a laptop computer and software you can get free off the internet. But just like when they made 2001, all the computer-controlled spaceships were basically 16 millimeter film that they shot as simple animation and then projected with little 60 millimeter projectors behind screens. We didn't project onto a screen, but we'd have to build those animations. And we didn't anticipate how long it would take because in many cases it was frame by frame. I mean, if anyone bothered to look at the animations on, for example, there's the gimmick in the film where the architectural character played by Lynne has his dream project of a earthquake-proof brick. He's convinced, like a jigsaw puzzle, you could design a brick that would be somewhat movable in an earthquake and still retain its position in space once the earthquake subsided. So he plays with the jigsaw puzzle and he plays with that concept, and then that was the gimmick I had as to how you could go from the math of architecture, of three-dimensional space, to the math of music, that they're both ultimately mathematical and they follow mathematical rules, and one can be displaced for the other. Turns out there's a little bit of science in that I didn't know at the time. Well, how do you portray that on film? You have to come up with a visual concept. So during the period we were shooting in San Francisco, when we're on location, there was no need for any graphics. But we met a guy there named Tim Boxell, who had been working with MTV on their so-called interstitials. MTV was famous that between videos, they wouldn't just have a logo, it'd have a slightly animated logo, would do something funky. And Tim was part of that process. And basically, Tim and I would go at night to a place called Rush's, which was on Water Street, which is where Steve had edited many of his videos, so there was a really good relationship there. We got a very good rate. We were paying, but it was a really good, after-hours rate. And there was one editor in particular, his name was David Yardley, who was very clever with just doing stuff. So many of what effects Steve had accomplished were because of David Yardley's cleverness, where literally there'd be like a static camera where you could shoot title cards, but we'd do limited stop frame-by-frame animations, or you could move things around with a joystick. So all the graphics that the computer created were basically done that night, the night before shooting, and we would literally take a taxi in from Water Street, having finished our night work. We felt like night elves. We had done our sewing. We delivered the tape to the video guy who would play it back on set to confirm it was good. I don't know what we would have done if it wasn't, because we didn't have a backup to our plan. And then go sleep, because we'd been up all night. I think it helped Steve that it got me off the set. And, tremendous credit has to be given to Tim Boxell and Dave Yardley for co-creating those effects. And I'll take a little bit of credit for it. I used to be a graphic artist, so I wasn't, unfamiliar in that world. I think the results were strong. Certainly in its time frame, were very strong.
She made me feel...
That's it. She made you feel. That's good. That's perfect. That's...
love.
I'm trying to think if there was any real animation in the whole thing. There may have been one thing where a 3D head rotated in space. There was a company called Digital Effects, and it was John Whitney Jr. John Whitney Sr. was responsible for slit scan photography. John Whitney Jr. created a company, and they had the first Cray computer. Anybody into computers will be curious about Cray computers. And the first big shot they ever did was creating Jupiter in 2010, which had to be done by computer animation. And the first film they did was called Last Starfighters, which was famous for creating not-minute models that move through space, controlled by motion-controlled cameras, but literally computer-generated spaceships. So I think we had one authentically computer-generated shot in the course of the 90 minutes of the film. For the last shot in the film, where the computer self-destructs, we went to a traditional effects house and made a contract with them to do that last shot. So it looked like there was some special effect-y explosion. It wasn't just an explosion. We, had people on set who could create explosions, but it had to look like a magical computer explosion. I had a good relationship with Giorgio Moroder, who was quite a successful songwriter, composer, producer of that era. And Giorgio had already was a little frustrated I hadn't brought it to him directly, so he had more control, but still happy that it was around because then he could exercise his skills. And he, of course, wrote probably the most successful single from the film. We'll always be together, together in electric dreams. And Giorgio did the score, which was very important because that was the beginning of the end of the film composer as melody writer. Giorgio used to say, the great film composers all wrote theme songs without calling them theme songs. The theme from Gone with the Wind could be a record. The theme from Dr. Zhivago, the theme from Exodus, I mean, you name it.
What?
Song. S-O-N.
N-G. I spell.
Okay, so try it.
What is it?
When I put the script together, because it was, in my mind, a musical, true musical, there was a book and then there were songs. And then those songs would be illustrated by visuals. I put together a demo tape of existing material that I liked a lot and I thought would be really ideal as examples for whoever would finally do the music. And I found more often than not, I was going to ELO as my reference, Jeff Lynne and ELO. And so I thought, well, what a great starting point to get Jeff Lynne to do some songs for the film. Now, he was famous for being hard to reach. He was so big in his field. And he had done Xanadu, and apparently that did not go as he had planned, although Xanadu was a huge success musically. Later became a hit Broadway musical. So he had nothing to be ashamed about. I mean, the film is important in film history, and it's lived on. But I finally did get a phone number for him. I just talked to him, just spoke to him, told him what I was up to, what I had done. I had some credentials by that point. And described the piece, and I think just in describing it, it sounded like something that he'd be intrigued by. So he agreed to read the script. And he called back and said, I really like it. I'd like to do as many songs as you'd like me to do. And I was a little taken aback because that was like almost too good. And I was wondering, am I making a mistake here? Not having one artist do all the songs. But I, realized, well, we're in bed with Virgin, and they've got Boy George, and they've got Phil Oakey. So I said two, which other than Giorgio, I don't think anyone contributed more than 2 songs. And he did his 2 songs quickly. The songs are wonderful. And Steve was very happy, and I was very happy. And it was good to have them so quickly because then it meant we needed to shoot them to track in the film. Visual images had to be prepared to be shot. So the song Video, for example, takes place on Alcatraz Island, but there are many film clips that the computer uses to come up with its concepts for the song. It was like a fake idea that the computer uses commercials to be inspired musically, to then create something actually good musically, quite good musically.
The satellites that search the night.
What are you doing? Stop!
And then the other song, again, had to have film clips prepared for shooting because it's where the computer, lonely, gives himself a party, disturbing the neighbors who are quite surprised to see it's a party of 0 participants.
Yeah, well, put your coats over there.
It's horrible.
Boy George and Culture Club wrote technically 3 songs, although it seems like 2. They wrote Love is Love, and then they wrote The Dream. And then they wanted to write a 3rd song, but we kind of had our rule that nobody was going to do more than 2 songs. So they decided they could write the 3rd song, but it had to be sung by someone else. And there was a singer at the time quite popular in England named P.P. Arnold, because she was starring in Andrew Lloyd Webber's Starlight Express. And so she sang the actual title song of Electric Dreams. That was written by Culture Club. George came to the set at least once, maybe twice, but he was a real fan of Bud Cort's. So that was his impetus. I remember when he called me one night, we were still working. He said, okay, I've got one of your songs. Can I come and play it for you? And I said, great. And we had prepared a proper listening area. He said, no, just you. And I want to play it in my car for you. He had a driver. He wasn't driving. So I heard that song. He's in the front seat, and I'm in the back seat. And he's playing the song. And, he was a huge megastar then. I've seen a lot. I've worked with Michael Jackson, Barbra Streisand, Madonna. I've never seen anyone create the stir that Boy George could create. So I kind of understood why he didn't want to get out of that car any more than he had to. But I can still see him he was kind of like a shy guy, peeking up his little head from the, what would you call it, the riser on the back of the front seat, the head riser, peeking and looking and kind of mouthing the lyrics, lip syncing, all for my benefit. I was like an audience of one. I thought, oh my God, I'm getting a concert from Boy George. And the songs are very good. We couldn't have been happier. And But he did not come during the shooting of those songs. He just came literally. He really did want to meet Bud Cort. That was a passion of his. And so then Bud, who was a very ceremonial type of person and a very, sociable guy, said, well, we'll all have lunch at my hotel. He was staying at a nice hotel. And so there was a lunch date for Boy George, and Ringo Starr showed up, and Kathleen Kennedy, the famous producer, and Frank Marshall, who were friends of Bud's. And we had the nicest lunch, and George could not have been more sociable.
Love is nothing without you.
I was lucky. I got to write the lyrics to one song, and then was it Helen Terry? She was the lead female singer for Culture Club. Incredible voice. Whenever they needed a female belter, that was Helen Terry. And so Richard Branson wanted to give her a solo career. And so she got to sing a solo on the Electric Dreams album called Now You're Mine, and it was written by Giorgio, and I got to write the lyric for it. Well, a terrible thing happened. Whenever you do a film like this and you work hard to have a soundtrack album, the whole point is to have a structured release pattern of singles, which at that time was pretty formulaic. You could almost set your calendar to it. If your release date was going to be July 1st, that weekend, you'd want to release your first single, say, 12 weeks prior to that, so that if it did work, if the single was any good, it could start climbing the charts and reach its pinnacle prior to the synchronicity, that the release of the song and the release of the film was properly timed. So the plan was that Video, the Jeff Lynne song, would be the first single released, and then it would be followed by Love Is Love, which was this amazing Culture Club song. And I was kind of tracking both the UK market and the US market because I could. I was back and forth. There were channels that would play the current hits, and I kept waiting to hear Video played in the States. We were well enough before the opening of the film. And by the time I finally thought, there's a problem here. It's a really good song. It's not being played or heard, and was doing well in the UK. I mean, that was on track. And I called Richard Branson, and he was always honest with me, and he said, well, I have some bad news. He said, there's a huge battle going on between us and Walter Yetnikoff, who was the head of CBS Records at the time. And Culture Club was a huge recording artist for CBS Records. Virgin was trying to start a label in America. It did not have its own label. And Culture Club was the scapegoat, the fighting dummy, whatever was, what was at issue. And Walter Yetnikoff famously said, I will not let Branson take my stars, Culture Club being one, and if he tries to open an airline in the United States, I'll have it shot down. He was a feisty guy, famous. And he said, so there was a blanket boycott by CBS of all Virgin product in America, and that's why it had not been released. And I got angry. I said, you're kidding me. I mean, how many weeks away are we, and you're telling me this now? Well, I didn't want to upset you. I said, well, you should upset me because I think I can do something about that. I know Walter very well. Because of Yentl, which was a CBS record, and because Barbara and Walter were so close because of all the time they'd spent in growing their own careers, I knew Walter from all kinds of social encounters. And I was sure he would take my call, and I'm sure he would commiserate with me, and he would repair this. And sure enough, my certainty was well-founded. I got off the phone with Richard Branson, nervously called Walter Yetnikoff. Hey, how you doing? Haven't seen you in a while. What's going on? I said, do you know the film Electric Dreams? Oh, yes, yes. Do you know the songs by Culture Club and the album in the States? He says, yes, that's ours if we ever want it to be, but we blocked it. And I said, well, you have to release that block. It's my film. He said, oh, my God, I didn't know. I'm so sorry. I never would have done it if I'd known it was your film. I'll release the block on that album, which he did. And Branson was stunned. How did you do it? I said, well, just because I have a good relationship with him. And I guess he wanted to be nice to me. But you should have told me this, 2 months ago. It was released, this hold, but it wasn't in enough time. That was problem one. So there was no music support for the film. And that was the whole point of going through all this, was to have this musical package released in its own universe, which cross-synchronizes with the film universe. The film did not open well the first weekend, which you could say, if you want to be a consequentialist, you could say, well, because the music didn't perform, there was nothing supporting the film. MGM was furious because they felt that that's one thing Richard had promised them in making their deal. And I was feeling bad. It was after the first weekend's release, and typically in Hollywood, more so now than back then, you calculate your box office based on that first weekend. There's almost nothing you can do. You just put all your ad spending prior to that first weekend. And then you spend money to maintain your audience. You don't put a lot more in after the opening weekend. I got a call from Hawaii from a famous producer named Alan Carr, who was beloved and well-known then. He later had his own fall from grace when he produced the Academy Awards, and it didn't go well. And he used, without permission, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs from the Disney film and their song. And the Academy turned against him. It was a fiasco. But he was beloved and considered a really successful producer because he before had seen films that he really liked and then got behind them, advised on their distribution, and created hits out of films that were not perceived as hits. Deer Hunter was one of them. Tommy, the movie, was another. He said, I can't believe it. I love this film. And there was no one in the audience. I said, well, marketing or lack of marketing. And I told him the story about the album. He said, well, that's a terrible shame. He said, here's what I'd like to do. They know me very well at MGM. I'd like to ask them to immediately pull the film, which nobody ever does. If a film doesn't succeed the first weekend, they let it play out. They might try to see if there's any kind of uptick, but basically that's the end of it. He said this, so theater owners will be shocked that the film is being taken away from them. What I will do then is work with Branson, work with CBS Records to create the musical phenomena that should be created, and then we will re-release the film with proper advertising, proper marketing, etc. He's basically saying, I know how to do this, you don't, but I will do this because that's how much I love this movie. I said, well, great, he said, I'm back this week, let's go meet Frank Yablans, the head of MGM, right away. We met with Frank right away, and he said, it's unconventional, but I'll do it. So basically, it's sort of like an abortion process. He's saying, I'm not sure about this baby, but let's remove it from the womb, put it on life support, and then put it back in the womb and give it a proper birth. The problem was, none of us saw it coming. Frank didn't see it coming. So he correctly excised it from theaters, and people literally are saying, where was this film? I heard about it, I wanted to see it. These are theaters that did have an audience, theaters that didn't. And we said, don't worry, it's coming back. It's going to be re-released in the fall. It was going to be like a 2 or 3 month holding period. And then a couple of weeks later, Frank got fired from the studio. That was the end of it. No new management was going to re-release a film that already had its trial in cinemas, no matter what the explanations were, no matter how grounded they might be. That was the end of it. And so the film today would go to Amazon or Netflix or something. It didn't. So the way that most people in the States saw the film, and by the way, to this day I regret either that Frank obviously that he got fired because it killed that film and killed the space film that was going to follow it by his being fired, but that Alan didn't keep his mouth shut and not bothered me, because I have a feeling it could have, by word of mouth, sustained itself in the theaters and developed a following. Because it certainly did, once it went to HBO, which it did within a certain period of time, it became very popular on HBO. Once people had access to it and talked about it, and it's all about word of mouth. Whatever they tell you, if a film works, eventually it gets an audience. And I had that experience with Caddyshack. I was executive producer on Caddyshack, technically executive in charge of production. The film did not open well, but the theaters didn't have anything planned, so they didn't yank it. It just stays there and dies its own death. But then slowly it started building. And suddenly it was playing well in theaters. But it took a while for word of mouth to work when the advertising did not. So for all I know, If Electric Dreams had not been yanked, and it was a true yank, I mean, literally, the theaters are told, you cannot show this anymore, you have to return the prints. I always had this thought that it could have played well, because it played very well in certain foreign territories. It was a huge hit in France, for example. It was a huge darling at the Cannes Film Festival. And there was critical excitement for the film. But if you just literally take it out of the theaters, there's no way people could have access, because there was nothing then like there is now. There was no YouTube, there was no, you know, VOD, video on demand. Its only little life support for having an audience was HBO. So I feel personally very grateful. I'm very grateful to be here. I'm very grateful that there's that kind of curiosity about the film. Everything in the film that turned out to be true, I'm delighted with. Any kind of prediction of it predicts the internet, in a sense. The last scene is basically the internet. And the bittersweet ending is that the computer lives forever on the internet, or Electric Dreams, whatever you want to call it.